Alright, y'all, so today I want to do a very quick video to give you my thoughts on the mockumentary or the fake documentary called CSA, or Confederate States of America. The basic gist is that this is like a fake documentary airing in an alternate world where the Confederate States of America have not only won the American Civil War from back in the day, but have conquered tons of land and have changed the world in a variety of ways. And this is kind of a meta sort of documentary, Ken Burns inspired kind of little documentary showing you the history of their country, while at the same time airing some commercials that would air in their world. And it's kind of a little meta thing, right? It's showing off their documentary, their stuff, and just, we're kind of observers from another dimension, so to speak, peeking our eyes on what if the South had won the American Civil War. And I think overall, I really enjoyed this. I thought this was quite funny. I thought that it had a lot of really interesting commentary, and in general, some decent alternate history here. Now, I want to preface this. I do not support the Confederacy, and I absolutely do not support the institution of slavery. I think it's a pretty obvious one. I would hope that you would not support slavery. And also, you have to what this documentary also clearly understands is that the South succeeded in the Civil War because of slavery. There's other factors that go into it, sure, like states' rights and other things, and that's a whole nother video, but to say the least, yeah, that's why the South left the United States, the Union, in the 1860s and caused the Civil War. Now, this documentary just presents a world where that same Confederate States not only won the war, but they also conquered the United States. So first, I'm going to kind of break this documentary down into pieces, and then I'm going to give you my thoughts on all of it. So first, I want to talk about the scenario. Now, they present the scenario in this kind of really cool Ken Burns-like documentary in their world, which is an awesome reference. I thought it made sense. Now, how did the South win the Civil War, according to this documentary, or mockumentary? Well, apparently what happened was the same thing happened in our timeline, with the Battle of Antietam. Now, the Battle of Antietam in our timeline was like a stalemate, because McClellan, the leading commanding general, the commander of the Army of the Potomac, found out about General Lee's plans to invade the North, which he found when one of their messengers left their very secretive battle plans on the ground, and it forced the Battle of Antietam. And I think, people usually consider it a stalemate. I've always kind of considered it a little bit of a Union victory, but that's besides the point. But apparently after this, Lincoln would, of course, give the Emancipation Proclamation, which is a very important document. It made all slaves in the rebel states freedmen. So if you were a slave, you could have ran over to the Union lines and you would have been free. And it was a very important one. It positioned the Civil War over the issue of slavery, which was the core cause of it, right? But in this world, the hugely skilled Confederate diplomat Judah B. Benjamin, apparently, who was a diplomat to Europe and France. I don't know why I said France, but he basically positioned all this and said, well, we're not fighting for slaves, we're fighting for our rights, our freedom of property, our states' rights, and all this. And he successfully convinced the British and French allies to not only recognize the independent Confederate States of America, but also support them militarily. And then it presents a scenario where at the Battle of Gettysburg, where Lee invades the North again, this time around he's boosted by French and British troops, and they ultimately win over the Union Army, and they basically get a peace and an armistice. They apparently signed some peace with Jefferson Davis at the White House, the Washington, D.C., and after that, they just absorb all of the United States. The North becomes the Confederate States of America, and that's basically the general scenario. Now, I'm going to give you my thoughts on this. I think part of this is plausible, but part of it is really not. For example, the Emancipation Proclamation really turned people against the South in the Civil War in our timeline. And, the Confederate diplomats, from what I've heard, they were pretty bad diplomats. They're definitely not aware of the times and the culture that they were in Europe. They were very blunt about their support of slavery. They would make pamphlets and show them off to European diplomats, and obviously a lot of these European countries had already banned slavery, so it didn't seem to set with them right. So I think it's possible, like, for example, like Judah B. Benjamin, I think I've heard he was a decent diplomat. If they were able to skillfully maneuver and misguide the war's beliefs into, well, we're just fighting for our states' rights and property, yeah, it could have been possible. If maybe also the South won more victories, which, like I said, I think it would have made a much more realistic scenario where that order I mentioned earlier with Lee's first invasion of the North was never found. And in turn, the Battle of Antietam would have never happened. And Lee would have maybe had a smashing victory somewhere in Pennsylvania, maybe took Washington, and then a Confederate diplomat like Judah B. Benjamin could have then brokered and got support from allies. Like I said, the South didn't have really too many chances to win the war, but that's just a few of them in my mind. Now, the idea that the Confederate States would take over all of America is laughable. I'm sorry. That would have never happened. What would have happened is that the South would have gained their independence and been a sovereign country within the territory that they established. Now, I'm not sure if, like, states like Kentucky would have joined them. I personally don't think that Kentucky would have joined the Confederacy. But it depends. It depends where their territorial claims were at the time of the peace, which I think in 1862 they had already invaded Kentucky. But, yeah, no. The North would have not taken over, would not been able to be taken over by the Confederate States. That's really laughable. But that being said, if you kind of excuse some of the not, realistic historical perspective here, this is a great scenario, and the world building that they go off on in this mockumentary is great. They kind of talk about that. They basically talk a lot about the wars. They talk about the fact that slavery was a core part about slavery has been in their ideas. And what's even scary is they pull a lot of documents and products from our timeline that were real products, that were very racial stereotypes, disparaging black people immensely. They also had these, ironically, they also had these very racist commercials that would air. That, like I said, made it seem like this documentary was being aired in their television, their world. And I thought it was pretty funny, but, it's also scary in a lot of aspects. Like, there's a cop spoof called Runaway. That freaked me out. I think the creepiest one was the fact that there was, like, a slave auction happening over the internet and over, like, a shopping day network, advertisement. Pretty horrific stuff, man. I mean, it's funny. It is really funny stuff and all that, but also there's obviously a really darker underbelly to all of that. But yeah, like I said, let's get into some pros. The pros are definitely the world building. When you get past the, kind of shaky historical divergence from our world to their world, it's really great stuff. I like how they build up. I like how they incorporate many ideas that the South might most likely would have done if they succeeded. Like, for example, states like Cuba and a lot of the Central American countries, like maybe Mexico or some other countries, I could absolutely see the Confederates wanting to invade them. I mean, they had plans in our timeline for doing such. So that felt pretty realistic, and I thought it was really cool that they incorporated that. I also felt that the country, when it, lasts as long as it did and reaches World War II and their support of Hitler, that makes sense. I mean, hypothetically, right, if a Confederate state still lasted till the times of World War II, and World War II still happened the way it did, I could totally see a Confederate state supporting a racist and genocidal Germany, the Nazi Germany. Totally makes sense. I do think I like it. I like how they reframe to certain events from our world. For example, instead of the Berlin Wall, there's the Cotton Wall, which is a big wall that the Confederates built between Canada and the Confederate States of America. I also like how they reframed the 60s, where it's like, oh my gosh, people are questioning slavery. Slavery is a bad thing. And then, like, Kennedy in this world is like some kind of like abolitionist, and then he gets shot and the movement dies. And then after that, then they just sort of go back to slavery. And then it, persists. And I guess it kind of follows some of the political trends, especially in the 80s with the big return to conservatism with the Republicans. I mean, man, it's just kind of crazy. And I enjoyed it for what it is. I mean, it's a hypothetical. Is it realistic the Confederate States could last as long as they did with slavery? I'm not exactly sure. I'm sure damn well they would have kept their slaves, but I'm not exactly sure if they would have lasted as long as a country. I mean, can you imagine the Confederate States in a modern day world? I don't know, but it's a very fascinating look and scenario. And, it presents a dark underbelly and a dark hate for humanity here. And I think big message I think to take away from this is the importance of not only that slavery is wrong, but also to the fact that, not only that, but it also kind of proves to some people who believe in the lost cause that, slavery was the cause, but also looks a little bit and makes some racial commentary. And maybe it's like I said, all this is satire. It's meant to just be a giant satire mockumentary, but also analyze some racial stereotypes and maybe look at our neighbors and especially our black people. That sounded wrong, my bad. But to look at other people of color and think that they're just like us and there's nothing wrong with that and they're cool and stuff. I'm not trying to sound racist. I'm not. But, that's, I think, kind of the underbelly of it. And it's also, like I said, I think the big thing about this mockumentary is just a big warning. It's just a big warning of how dark the world could have been, especially with the epilogue, which was basically showing off many of the real-life products that were all real, by the way. I thought they were fake, made for the mockumentary, but nope, they were real, and it's crazy, and it's quite sad. And it's just kind of this whole mockumentary is designed like it's basically to show, put a light on it. And show people, and hopefully they can learn from their past mistakes and become better people and better humans. I also want to mention another huge pro is the production quality. The production quality is out of this world. It is really great stuff. It's really good. The commercials were well done. The Ken Burns thing was really well done. Like, honestly, it's honestly something like if they could have aired on TV and like no one would have noticed the difference back in 2004 when this came out. And also, I want to quite mention, if some people may think this film is racist, the guy who directed this was a black guy. So just want to make a quick mention of that. But yeah, I don't have too many problems with this thing. I mean, it's alternate history. It's basically a very elaborated, glorified fan fiction, but it's, I liked it. I liked it for what it is, but it's also a very haunting warning of how worse our world could have became. And kind of just a message and a warning to people that, don't stray into horrific racial ideologies, or you could end up in a very confusing, bad world like this one. But yeah, this is my quick thoughts on the 2004 mockumentary CSA. I think it's free on YouTube still, so you can definitely check it out if y'all want to check it out. If you're a Civil War buff like me, I would definitely recommend it. But yeah, my quick thoughts on this mockumentary. Hopefully you all have a good day, and peace, y'all.